My parents forced me to sell my country house to pay off their massive secret debt. My father slammed his fist on the table, screaming that the family was in trouble and they needed my money immediately. I did not cry or beg. Instead, I took complete control and sold the property behind their backs. 2 weeks later, my mother showed up at the estate with event planners ready to host a party on my dime, unaware that the new owner was waiting for her at the front door. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect yourself from toxic relatives who see you as a bank account. My name is Clara. I am 33 years old and work as an independent financial advisor in New York. Growing up in Westchester County meant maintaining a flawless image to the outside world. To our neighbors, my parents Richard and Patricia were the picture of suburban success. They drove luxury European vehicles, hosted catered summer parties, and wore designer clothing to the grocery store. But inside our immaculate home, the reality was a suffocating obsession with status that drained our bank accounts and eroded any genuine affection. I was the pragmatic middle child who saw through the facade early on. I moved out the moment I turned 18, put myself through university using student loans, and built a lucrative career in wealth management. Through grueling 70-hour work weeks and disciplined investing, I purchased a stunning $1.5 million historical property in the Hudson Valley, free and clear. It was my sanctuary, far away from my parents' toxic expectations. The illusion of their perfect life shattered completely on Thanksgiving Day. The dining room table was set with fine china and crystal glasses. The house smelled of roasted turkey and expensive spices. My father, Richard, poured himself a third glass of vintage red wine before the food was even served. The tension in the room was thick and suffocating. He did not even look up from his plate when he dropped the bomb that would destroy our family forever. "We need to talk about your house in the Hudson Valley," he said, his voice cutting through the soft jazz playing on the stereo. I set my water glass down carefully on the linen tablecloth. "Which house?" I asked, though I knew exactly which property he meant. "The only house you own, Clara." My father sighed heavily, wiping his mouth with a monogrammed napkin. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and tossed it across the large dining table. It landed right next to my plate. I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a pre-foreclosure notice from a major national bank addressed directly to my parents. My eyes scanned the columns of numbers at the bottom of the page. The figures were catastrophic. They were hundreds of thousands of dollars in default on their primary mortgage and multiple secondary lines of credit. As a financial advisor, I knew instantly that this was not a sudden mistake. This was the result of years of reckless spending and chronic financial mismanagement. "We are in a bit of a bind," my father said. His tone was infuriatingly casual, as if he were discussing a minor scheduling conflict at the country club rather than absolute financial ruin. "The market has been highly volatile lately. Some of my aggressive investments did not yield the expected returns. We need cash, Clara, and we need it by the end of the month, or the bank will initiate the final proceedings." I placed the document back on the table. "You are nearly bankrupt," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "This is not a market fluctuation. This is a decade of spending money you do not actually have." My mother, Patricia, slammed her hand flat against the mahogany table, making the silver cutlery rattle. "Do not use that disrespectful tone with your father," she snapped. "We provided absolutely everything for you growing up. We gave you a perfect life in this beautiful, exclusive neighborhood. Now the family is facing a serious emergency, and it is time for you to step up and do your part." I looked at my mother. She was wearing a new silk dress and a diamond tennis bracelet that I knew for a fact had been purchased just weeks ago. "Step up and do what exactly?" I asked. "We need you to sell the Hudson Valley house," my father said bluntly, leaning forward. "The current market value is around $1.5 million right now." Since you do not carry a mortgage on it, that is pure equity. We will take the proceeds, clear this debt, and use the remaining balance to stabilize our investment portfolios. You can move back into your childhood bedroom here until you get back on your feet. The sheer audacity of the demand left a ringing silence in the room. They were not asking for a small temporary loan. They were demanding I liquidate my entire net worth, the physical manifestation of my hard work and independence, to bail them out of their own pathetic vanity. I am not selling my house, I said, simply pushing the pre-foreclosure notice back across the table. You are adults. You made these disastrous financial decisions yourself. You will have to face the severe consequences. You selfish, ungrateful brat, my mother, Patricia, hissed. Her face turned an ugly shade of red, contrasting sharply with her perfect blonde hair. We are talking about losing our home, the home you grew up in. Our standing in this community will be completely ruined. Do you have any idea how humiliating it will be when the neighbors find out the bank took our house away? I stared at her blank face. My mother interpreted my silence as hesitation. She leaned across the table, her tone shifting to a cloying sweetness I knew well. Clara, darling, you have to look at the bigger picture here. What do you even need that massive 5-bedroom estate for anyway? You are 33 years old and entirely alone. You have no husband and certainly no children running around those empty halls. It is an oversized trophy taking up resources your family desperately needs right now. Her words were designed to hit where she assumed I was vulnerable. She scoffed, waving toward the living room where my sister sat. Look at Brittany. She is 30 years old and contributing to society the right way. She gave us a grandchild. She is building a legacy with Jamal. They have a life requiring financial backing. You just sit in that empty house counting your money and judging us. I kept my posture straight, refusing to let her see my annoyance. You mean the same Brittany who has never held a job for more than 6 months? I asked, my voice remaining steady. The sister who spends her days posting staged photographs while her husband works 80-hour shifts at the hospital to fund her shopping habits. If she is building such a fantastic legacy, ask her to sell her assets to save your house. My father slammed his palm against the table. Leave your sister out of this. Brittany has a family to maintain. Jamal comes from a prominent background and she needs to keep up appearances for his parents. She cannot liquidate what little she has. You are hoarding wealth while your own flesh and blood faces absolute ruin. It is selfish, Clara. It is exactly why you cannot keep a man. A cold laugh escaped my throat. The audacity was almost cinematic. I locked eyes with my mother. Let us talk about who hoards wealth and who actually pays their way in this family. Do you remember when I was 18, you sat me down and said the family business had a minor cash flow issue, so I would need to take out federal student loans to pay for university? My mother shifted, adjusting her diamond bracelet. That was a completely different economic climate, she muttered defensively. We did what we had to do to survive. I nodded slowly. You did what you had to do. I took on $80,000 in student debt. I worked night shifts as a waitress and weekend shifts as a library assistant just to afford textbooks. I graduated, lived in a cramped studio apartment, and ate canned soup for 5 years while I aggressively paid off every single cent. Meanwhile, 2 years after you told me you were too broke to help with my education, you bought Brittany a brand new Porsche for her college graduation. They both froze. The sudden injection of absolute reality disrupted their carefully constructed narrative of victimhood. My father opened his mouth, but I did not give him the chance to speak. You bought her a luxury sports car, paid her rent in full for 3 years. I continued, my voice crisp. You prioritized her comfort and your country club memberships over my basic needs. You forced me to become financially independent because I was not your golden child. Now you have the absolute nerve to sit here and demand that the independent wealth I built by myself be handed over to clean up your spectacular financial failures. Patricia's eyes welled with manufactured tears. She dabbed at them with her expensive napkin, playing the wounded matriarch flawlessly. We made mistakes, Clara. What parent does not make mistakes? But we are blood. When blood is bleeding, you offer a bandage. You do not point out how they got the wound. You are holding on to ancient history because you are bitter and jealous of your sister. I am not jealous of anyone in this room, I replied. In fact, I am profoundly grateful. By cutting me off financially, you gave me the greatest gift possible. You taught me how to manage money, how to read contracts, and how to spot a bad investment. Right now, Richard and Patricia, you two are the definition of a catastrophic investment. You ungrateful wretch! My father snarled, his face contorting with genuine rage. He stood up, towering over the dining table, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. We gave you life. We raised you. If you do not sign that property over to us, you are dead to this family. You will not be welcome at Christmas, and you will certainly not be welcome at your sister's upcoming vow renewal ceremony. I remained seated, completely unbothered by his theatrical display of dominance. I picked up my designer handbag from the floor and placed it neatly on my lap. If the price of admission to this family is $1.5 million, then I consider myself completely priced out of the market. I will not sign over my deed. I will not give you a single dollar from my accounts. You created this debt to impress people who do not even like you, and now you can face the foreclosure process all by yourselves. My mother gasped, clutching her chest tightly, as if I had physically struck her. You cannot mean that. You simply cannot just walk away and let us lose absolutely everything we have built. We will be homeless, Clara. We will have to declare bankruptcy immediately. Jamal's family will find out, and they will absolutely judge us without mercy. It will destroy Brittany's marriage and her entire future. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored skirt. I looked down at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel like an inadequate burden. Then I highly recommend you start packing your designer clothes into boxes because the bank does not care about your social standing. Enjoy your turkey. As I turned on my heel to leave the dining room, a sharp, whining voice sliced through the heavy air. You are unbelievably selfish, Clara. Brittany marched in from the adjoining living room, her phone clutched in one hand and a glass of expensive champagne in the other. She had obviously been eavesdropping on the entire conversation. She wore a designer silk dress that I strongly suspected was bought on maxed-out credit cards, her hair styled perfectly for the social media photos she had been taking all afternoon. She stepped right up to the dining table, positioning herself physically next to our parents to form a united front against me. You are honestly going to let Mom and Dad lose their home just so you can hoard a massive property you do not even use? You have absolutely no heart. I paused, looking my younger sister up and down. I use my home quite frequently, Brittany. It is the asset I bought with the money I earned from my actual career. Unlike you, I do not rely on other people to fund my daily existence. Brittany scoffed, rolling her eyes with theatrical exaggeration. Oh, please. Do not act like your job is some noble calling. You shuffle other people's money around all day. You are a glorified calculator. You sit in a sterile office obsessing over spreadsheets, tax brackets, and profit margins because you have absolutely nothing else going on in your miserable life. Look at you. You have no husband, no children, no real legacy. I am raising a family. I am creating a beautiful home for my husband and my child. I have an actual brand to maintain on social media. My followers look up to me. I need a stable foundation, and Mom and Dad need a place to live to maintain our community standing. You have millions of dollars locked up in a historic estate just for your own massive ego. It is disgusting how greedy you have become. You could save this entire family with a single signature, but you would rather watch us burn just to prove a petty point. From the doorway of the living room, Jamal finally stepped forward. He had been standing there quietly, his tall, athletic frame tense with visible discomfort. Jamal was a highly respected orthopedic surgeon, a man who came from an affluent, well-educated African-American family with generations of real, sustainable wealth. He was fundamentally a good man, grounded and practical, which made his marriage to my superficial sister a constant mystery to me. He adjusted his collar, looking deeply embarrassed by the spectacle unfolding in front of him. Brittany, let us take a step back and calm down, Jamal said, his voice deep and soothing, trying to inject some much-needed rationality into the room. Clara is right. It is her personal property. We cannot demand she sell her home to cover a financial shortfall. Richard, Patricia, if things are truly this bad with the bank, we need to look at consolidation options, or perhaps downsizing your lifestyle. Screaming at Clara is not going to solve a foreclosure. There are other ways to handle this debt without tearing the family apart. I can look over the bank notices with you tomorrow morning. We can figure something out logically without demanding anyone liquidate their assets. Brittany whipped her head around, her eyes flashing with sudden venomous fury. She pointed a manicured finger directly at her husband's chest. Do not tell me to calm down, Jamal. You do not understand how this works at all. You grew up with a silver spoon with your perfect Dubois family trust funds and zero financial worries. This is my family. We are facing a massive crisis, and Clara is holding the exact lifeline we need. So stay completely out of it. This is between me, my parents, and my greedy sister. Jamal opened his mouth to reply, his jaw clenching tight, but my mother immediately chimed in to support Brittany. She is absolutely right, Jamal. You are a wonderful son-in-law, but this is a private matter concerning the bloodline of this family. Clara owes us for the life we gave her. We are simply asking for a fair return on that investment. Jamal looked at me, his dark eyes communicating a mixture of apology and helpless frustration. He pressed his lips together and took a step back, crossing his arms over his chest. He was a brilliant surgeon who made life or death decisions every single day, yet in this house he was completely silenced by his entitled wife and her delusional parents. The blatant disrespect Brittany showed him was appalling, but it was not my marriage to fix. My father, sensing that Jamal had been successfully neutralized, stepped back into the center of the conflict. He straightened his silk tie, puffing out his chest as he delivered his final verdict. He pointed a trembling finger at my face. Listen to me very carefully, Clara. I am the head of this family, and I am giving you one last chance to make things right. You will contact your real estate agent tomorrow morning. You will list that Hudson Valley house for an immediate cash sale. You will wire the proceeds directly into my primary account to clear the bank liens, and whatever is left over will go toward Brittany's vow renewal ceremony next spring. If you refuse to do this, if you walk out that door tonight, you are dead to me. You are dead to your mother. You will no longer be considered a part of this family. I will completely disown you. We will erase you from our lives, and you will die exactly as you live right now, completely and utterly alone. The room fell dead silent. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and absolute. My mother lifted her chin, looking at me with cold, expectant eyes. Brittany smirked, taking a triumphant sip of her champagne, fully believing that the threat of absolute isolation would force me to break. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg for their love, to negotiate, to desperately cling to the toxic bond we shared. Instead, I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. The invisible chains of guilt and obligation that had weighed me down for 33 years simply snapped. I looked at my father, then at my mother, and finally at my sister. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly reached over to the entryway table, picked up my tailored wool coat, and slipped it over my shoulders. I grabbed my car keys and looked back at them one last time. I accept your terms. I said, my voice as smooth and cold as glass. Consider me disowned. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving dinner. I turned the brass knob, pulled the heavy oak door open, and walked out into the crisp November air. I did not look back when my mother shrieked my name. I did not flinch when the door slammed shut behind me. I simply walked straight to my car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving them to completely drown in the inevitable consequences of their own spectacular financial failures. Stepping out, I hailed a car to Madison Avenue. My mind compartmentalized the betrayal, focusing entirely on the logistical threat. By weaponizing the legal system to steal my property, my parents had officially reclassified themselves from toxic relatives to hostile financial adversaries. I would treat them with the exact same ruthlessness I applied to corporate raiders attempting a hostile takeover of a portfolio. Mr. Harrison's office occupied the top floor of a glass skyscraper. He possessed a predatory instinct for dismantling fraudulent claims. When the receptionist ushered me into his corner office, he was already standing by his conference table. The pre-foreclosure notice and the ridiculous lien document I had emailed him were displayed on his monitor. "Take a seat, Clara," Mr. Harrison said. I pulled the property records the second we hung up. The lien was filed yesterday afternoon in Hudson Valley jurisdiction. The attorney of record for your parents is a man named Arthur Vance. Do you know him? I shook my head. I have never heard the name. My parents usually employ a high-end estate lawyer. Why would they use someone else for this? Because their usual estate lawyer would never touch something this radioactive, Mr. Harrison replied, handing me a printed dossier. Arthur Vance operates a strip mall law firm known for filing nuisance lawsuits and aggressive mechanic liens meant to tie up assets. He relies on property owners settling out of court to remove the lien quickly. Your parents shopped around until they found someone desperate enough to file a claim based on a medical settlement check. I opened the dossier, skimming his disciplinary history. It was littered with minor bar association reprimands. They are counting on the fact that I am a single woman who will panic at the sight of a court summons, I said. They assume I will blindly write them a check for whatever they demand just to make the headache disappear. They need cash immediately to stop the bank from seizing their suburban house. Mr. Harrison tapped a silver pen against his pad. Let us dissect their actual claim. They are asserting that the $50,000 wire transfer from their joint account to your personal account a decade ago was an unrecorded equity investment in your future real estate acquisitions. Do they have any emails written, contracts, or text messages indicating this money was an investment rather than the return of your insurance payout? Absolutely nothing, I stated confidently. Because it was my money. The insurance company settled for $50,000 after I was hit by a distracted driver. Because I was heavily medicated with a fractured collarbone, my father convinced me to deposit the check for safekeeping. When I recovered and asked for my money, they stalled for weeks. I threatened them with banking fraud before they finally wired my funds back. Now, 10 years later, they claim that exact wire transfer was them buying a stake in a house I did not purchase until 5 years after the accident. Mr. Harrison let out a cynical laugh. It is legally laughable. A wire transfer without a corresponding equity agreement holds absolutely zero weight in establishing real estate ownership. In the state of New York, real estate transactions must be strictly bound by the statute of frauds. They need a written, signed contract to claim equity. Arthur Vance knows this perfectly well. He filed the lien solely as an extortion tactic, hoping to cloud your title. Can we crush it? I asked, leaning forward, my eyes locked on his. I can have this lien dissolved and thrown out of court within 48 hours, Mr. Harrison said. I will file an emergency order to show cause demanding Arthur Vance produce the non-existent equity contract. When he fails, the judge will vacate the lien immediately. Furthermore, I will file for sanctions against Vance for filing a frivolous encumbrance, and I will sue your parents for all attorney fees incurred. They will end up owing us money. I absorbed his strategy, feeling deep satisfaction. The plan was flawless. It would obliterate their extortion attempt and leave them in a worse financial position. But as I sat there, a different calculating thought began to form. If Mr. Harrison simply destroyed the lien quietly, my parents would just find another desperate angle to attack me. They were backed into a corner by their impending foreclosure. They would not stop until they drained me dry or dragged me down. Wait, I said. I need you to draft the emergency order to dissolve the lien. Have it completely ready to file, but do not file it yet. Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow. Keeping a fraudulent lien on your property is risky. It clouds your title. Why would you delay destroying their claim? Because a quick legal victory is exactly what they expect from me, I replied. If we strike the lien down today, they will just regroup and launch another attack. I do not want to just win a minor legal skirmish. I want to permanently remove their ability to ever touch me or my assets again. I need to understand the true depth of their financial desperation before I finalize my counterstrike. Mr. Harrison studied me for a long moment. He set his pen down and nodded slowly. You are the client. We will hold the emergency order ready. What is your next move? I am going to do some investigating of my own, I said, standing up. I need to find out exactly why my parents are suddenly facing total bankruptcy, and why my sister Brittany is so aggressively pushing them to steal my house. The math does not add up, and I am going to find the missing variables. I shook Mr. Harrison's hand and walked out. I had my legal shield fully prepared. Now I just needed to find the one perfect weapon that would shatter my family's toxic suburban facade completely and forever leaving them with absolutely nothing. Stepping out of the glass skyscraper and into the biting Manhattan wind, I pulled my tailored coat tightly around my shoulders. My mind was racing with rapid calculations, aggressively analyzing every single variable of my parents' sudden financial collapse. Mr. Harrison had successfully given me the exact legal leverage I needed to defend my property against their absurdly fraudulent lien, but playing defense was never my preferred strategy. I needed offensive intelligence. I walked 2 blocks down Madison Avenue, keeping my head down against the cold, and ducked into an exclusive dimly lit espresso bar favored by corporate executives and wealthy locals. The rich aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans and expensive French pastries offered a brief moment of grounding reality. I stepped up to the counter, ordered a simple black espresso, paid the barista, and turned around to find a quiet corner table where I could meticulously map out my next move. As I spun around, my mind still entirely focused on real estate statutes and legal counterstrikes, I nearly collided with a tall, broad-shouldered man who was rushing blindly toward the counter. I sidestepped just in time, protecting my coffee cup, and looked up to offer a polite, automatic apology. The words instantly died in my throat. Standing right in front of me, wearing dark blue surgical scrubs and a heavy gray wool overcoat, was Jamal. My brother-in-law looked absolutely terrible. The usual vibrant, commanding energy that characterized the brilliant orthopedic surgeon was completely and utterly gone. Deep, dark purple circles severely bruised the sensitive skin under his eyes. His posture, normally so perfectly upright and confidently athletic, was slumped with sheer, undeniable exhaustion. He looked exactly like a man who had not slept a full, uninterrupted night in several agonizing weeks. "Clara," he said, his voice raspy and genuinely startled. He blinked a few times rapidly, as if he was physically struggling to bring my face into clear focus under the warm ambient lights of the cafe. "I am so incredibly sorry. I honestly did not see you standing there. I was just rushing in to grab a double shot of espresso before heading straight back to the hospital for another grueling shift." I maintained a perfectly neutral expression, silently studying his severely fatigued appearance. "Hello, Jamal. You look like you are completely running on empty today." He let out a hollow, humorless laugh and deeply rubbed the back of his stiff neck. "You really have absolutely no idea, Clara. It has been a brutally exhausting month. Listen about what happened on Thanksgiving. I really want to sincerely apologize for how terribly things escalated. I genuinely tried to step in and mediate, but emotions were running incredibly high at that table. I never intended for you to feel so aggressively ganged up on in that dining room. You do not need to apologize for my parents or for your extremely entitled wife," I replied smoothly, taking a very slow, calculated sip of my hot espresso. "They are fully and solely responsible for their own deeply toxic behavior. You are just unfortunate collateral damage in their ongoing pathetic suburban drama." Jamal sighed heavily, stepping entirely out of the fast-moving line of rushing customers to stand much closer to my small corner table. "It is not just petty family drama, Clara. Richard and Patricia are in a genuinely terrible financial bind right now. I know they approached you the wrong way, and I know they demanded too much, but they are incredibly desperate. Brittany is practically making herself physically sick with constant worry over them losing the family house." I raised a single eyebrow. my sharp financial instincts immediately kicking into high gear at his choice of words. They are desperate solely because of their own chronic decades-long financial mismanagement. They deliberately live wildly beyond their actual means just to impress people they secretly despise. That is absolutely not my burden to shoulder. I know that, Jamal said softly, noticeably lowering his deep voice and cautiously glancing around the crowded, noisy coffee shop. But it is not just their frivolous lifestyle spending this time. It is the massive business supply chain crisis Richard dealt with last year. He took an absolutely catastrophic financial hit. Brittany told me they have been completely drowning ever since that bad overseas container deal spectacularly fell through. I completely froze. My mind instantly halted all of its previous legal calculations and locked onto the bizarre, entirely fabricated statement he had just casually made. Richard had never worked in supply chain logistics. He had worked in regional sales for a mid-tier insurance firm until he was quietly and unceremoniously let go 3 full years ago. There was absolutely no business supply chain crisis. There was no bad overseas container deal. It was a complete lie. I kept my facial expression perfectly still, masking the sudden surge of adrenaline. Right. The supply chain crisis. I heard it really decimated their available cash flow. Jamal rubbed his tired eyes again, leaning his heavy frame against the wooden structural pillar next to my table. Yeah. That is exactly why I have been picking up every single emergency on-call surgical shift at the hospital for the past 4 months. I am practically living in the operating room right now. I desperately need to replenish my private accounts before my mother conducts her mandatory annual review of the Dubois family trusts next week. If she sees the massive financial withdrawals, she will immediately demand a full audit. I really do not want to deal with her rigorously interrogating Brittany about our supposedly charitable family contributions. The air inside my lungs felt completely ice cold. Your private accounts? I asked carefully. Jamal nodded slowly, offering a genuinely tired smile. I authorized Brittany to secretly transfer exactly $300,000 to Richard last August. It was a bridge loan to save their home. I know it was not enough, so they asked you. I stared at Jamal. My mind raced through 1,000 different financial scenarios, cross-referencing dates, asset classes, and the basic reality of my family's income history. $300,000. A bridge loan for a business that fundamentally did not exist. I kept my face entirely impassive, locking my hands together on the small cafe table so he would not see them tremble with the sudden rush of pure vindictive clarity. You authorized Brittany to transfer $300,000 to my father, I asked, forcing my voice to sound perfectly conversational. You just handed over $350,000 in liquid cash based on a story about overseas shipping containers. Jamal let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples with 2 strong fingers. I know it sounds reckless, Clara. I am a surgeon, not an investment banker. I work consecutive double shifts. I do not have the time or the mental bandwidth to micromanage our shared finances. Brittany handles all of the day-to-day accounts, the bill paying, and the asset transfers. She came to me crying last summer. She said Richard was facing absolute ruin because of some disastrous logistical failure in his supply chain business. She begged me to help them. She said it was only a temporary bridge loan and that they would pay it back with interest the second their inventory cleared customs. And you never asked to see the commercial loan agreements, I pressed, tilting my head slightly. You never asked for a promissory note or a deed of trust against their suburban property to secure your capital. Jamal looked genuinely defensive. We are family, Clara. I trusted my wife. I trusted her parents. They are my in-laws. I assumed they were operating in good faith. But then the holidays rolled around, and Brittany told me the logistics deal completely fell through. The money was gone. That is why they are suddenly facing foreclosure now. The bank is calling in their primary mortgage, and my $300,000 is just lost in the wind. That is exactly why I am picking up every single surgical rotation. I have to put that money back into my private trust account before my mother runs her annual audit next Friday. If my mother discovers I drained hundreds of thousands of dollars to bail out Richard and Patricia, she will absolutely go scorched earth on my marriage. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together in my mind with terrifying precision. It was a masterpiece of suburban fraud. My parents did not have a supply chain business. They never did. They had zero overseas containers. What they did have was a daughter who had gained unrestricted access to the Dubois family wealth. Brittany had not transferred $300,000 to save our parents from a business failure. She had systematically embezzled that money to fund their combined psychotic obsession with maintaining a wealthy facade. I thought back to last August, the exact timeline Jamal had just given me. Last August was when my mother suddenly debuted a $50,000 kitchen renovation. It was when my father upgraded his luxury sedan. It was when Brittany and Jamal went on a lavish 3-week vacation to the Maldives, a trip Brittany claimed she paid for using her lucrative social media influencer sponsorships. She had not paid for it with sponsorships. She had paid for it using the money she stole from her own husband. They had burned through Jamal's $300,000 in less than a year, spending it on designer clothes, country club fees, and luxury cars. And now the bill had finally come due. The bank was foreclosing on my parents' house because they had stopped paying their actual mortgage to maintain their fake lifestyle. But more importantly, the Dubois matriarch was coming to audit the trust next week. Brittany was completely cornered. She needed to replace the stolen $300,000 immediately, and she needed extra cash to save our parents from imminent homelessness. They needed a massive, untraceable influx of liquid capital to hide their spectacular embezzlement. They needed my $1.5 million house. That was the real motive. The Thanksgiving ambush, the screaming demands, the fraudulent legal lien Arthur Vance had filed against my deed. It was never just about a simple foreclosure. It was a desperate, coordinated criminal conspiracy to steal my real estate equity, to cover up Brittany's massive theft before Jamal and his powerful mother found out the absolute truth. They were willing to destroy my entire life to hide their own crimes. I looked at Jamal. He was a brilliant, dedicated surgeon who spent his days saving lives, completely blind to the fact that his own wife was a financial parasite bleeding him dry. He looked so incredibly tired, working 80-hour weeks to replace money that his in-laws had gleefully squandered on silk dresses and vintage wine. A small, sympathetic part of me wanted to drop the hammer right then and there. I wanted to tell him that his wife was a liar, an embezzler, and a fraud. I wanted to tell him that Richard and Patricia were con artists who were trying to steal my house to cover up the exact theft that was destroying his life. But I am a financial advisor. I do not act on emotion. I act on leverage. If I told Jamal the truth right now in the middle of a crowded coffee shop without hard documentary evidence in my hands, Brittany would simply manipulate him again. She would cry, she would play the victim, and she would convince him that I was just a bitter, jealous sister trying to ruin their marriage. I needed bulletproof documentation. I needed the financial statements. I needed to trap them in a corner so tight they could never lie their way out. I took a deep breath and decided to keep my absolute silence tonight. I offered Jamal a polite smile, wished him a good shift, and walked out into the Manhattan wind. My mind was no longer just calculating legal defense strategies. I was actively building a financial guillotine. I walked to my garage, retrieved my car, and began the drive north to my Hudson Valley property. Today my knuckles gripped the cold leather steering wheel with white-hot, furious intensity. The sheer scale of my family's deception was staggering. They were actively executing a criminal conspiracy, stealing from a brilliant surgeon working 80-hour weeks, and attempting to steal my home to cover their tracks before his prominent family audited their trusts. I finally turned off the highway and navigated the winding road leading to my private wrought iron gates. As my property came into view, I instinctively hit the brakes. My jaw tightened. Parked aggressively across my wide circular driveway were 3 large vehicles that did not belong to me. Two were sleek black commercial vans bearing the elegant logo of an ultra-luxury event planning firm. The third vehicle was a bright white Range Rover. I recognized that obnoxious SUV instantly. My parents had purchased it for Brittany last year, undoubtedly using funds she had secretly siphoned from Jamal's accounts. I parked off to the side, killed the engine, and stepped out onto the gravel. I walked slowly up the stone path toward my front lawn, heels clicking sharply against the pavement. My front yard is a meticulously manicured expanse of green grass leading up to the historic wraparound porch. Right now, it looked like a commercial construction zone. Half a dozen people dressed in matching black uniforms were marching across my property, holding clipboards, tablets, and professional measuring tapes. Standing dead center in the middle of my lawn, wearing knee-high suede boots and a dramatically oversized cashmere coat, was my sister. Brittany was wildly gesturing toward my front porch, loudly barking orders at a woman who appeared to be the lead event coordinator. "I want the main floral archway positioned exactly at the bottom of these steps," Brittany commanded, her shrill voice echoing across my quiet property. "We need cascading white roses and imported orchids. Jamal loves orchids. And the champagne tower needs to be set up on the west side of the veranda, perfectly catching the sunset for the photographer. Make sure you measure the clearance for the string quartet tent over by the oak trees." I stood silently on the edge of the lawn, crossing my arms over my chest, simply watching this breathtaking display of absolute delusion. Brittany was casually designing a lavish society party on property she did not own, funded by money she had stolen while her husband was running on empty in a surgical ward trying to replace the cash she blew. One of the event assistants finally noticed me standing there and nervously tapped the lead planner on the shoulder. The entire group stopped what they were doing. Brittany turned around, her annoyed expression instantly morphing into a smug, triumphant smirk the second she locked eyes with me. She confidently strutted across my grass, stopping a few feet away, radiating the toxic arrogance of someone who believed she had already won the war. "Clara," Brittany said, feigning a tone of pleasant surprise, "I honestly did not expect to see you all the way up here today. I figured you would be holed up in your city office crying over those legal documents served to you. Did you come up here to finally start packing your boxes? Because you really should get a head start. We are going to need the interior completely cleared out by next month, so the design team can prep the main hall." I looked from her smug face to the team of confused event planners standing awkwardly behind her. "What exactly are you doing on my private property, Brittany?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and perfectly controlled. Brittany let out a theatrical mocking laugh and tossed her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "Oh, stop clinging to the past, Clara. We both know you are absolutely drowning in that lawsuit Mom and Dad filed. You owe them hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity, and you do not have the liquid cash to fight a prolonged legal battle. It is only a matter of time before the judge forces you to hand over the deed to settle the family debt. I am just getting a crucial head start on the logistics." She gestured grandly toward the historic facade of my home. "Jamal and I are hosting our 5-year vow renewal ceremony right here this coming spring. It is going to be the social event of the season. His mother and the entire Dubois family will be flying in. Mom and Dad thought it would be absolutely perfect to host it at the new family country estate once the deed transfer goes through. We are expecting 200 guests. It will completely reestablish our family's social standing after that nasty little business hiccup Dad dealt with last year." The sheer audacity was almost mesmerizing. She had orchestrated an elaborate lie to her husband about an overseas business failure, embezzled his money to fund her shopping addiction, and was now actively utilizing my stolen property to host a lavish party to impress the very family she was robbing blind. She genuinely believed that the fraudulent lien had completely broken my spirit. She thought the sight of court papers had terrified me into silent submission, assuming I was too weak and isolated to fight back against the unified front of our toxic parents and her relentless entitlement. "You are planning a massive, expensive vow renewal ceremony on a property you do not own?" I stated, ensuring my voice carried clearly across the lawn, so every single event planner could hear me. Using money your husband is currently working double shifts at the hospital to replace. Brittany's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a brief flash of genuine panic crossing her eyes at the mention of Jamal's work schedule. But she quickly recovered her arrogance, masking her fear. Do not try to act tough, Clara. You lost. The lien is filed. The house is basically ours. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand to see her younger sister building a beautiful legacy. So do us all a favor. Go inside, start packing your cheap clothes, and leave the property management to the people who actually know how to host a high society event. I did not scream. I did not demand she leave. I did not threaten to call the police for trespassing. A screaming match was exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to look unhinged, crazy, and desperate in front of her expensive vendors. She wanted a dramatic suburban fight. Instead, I gave her nothing. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and calmly took 3 clear, high-resolution photographs of Brittany standing on my lawn with her luxury event team. I smiled at her, a cold, predatory smile that made her take a sudden, uncertain step backward. I am not going to pack a single box, Brittany, but I highly recommend you take plenty of measurements today. Make sure you get the exact dimensions of the front gates. You are going to need to know exactly how wide they are when they permanently slam shut in your face. Without waiting for her response, I turned my back on her and walked straight toward my front door. I unlocked it, stepped inside my beautiful, quiet home, and locked the heavy deadbolt behind me. I walked straight to my home office, powered on my laptop, and prepared to execute the next phase of my strategy. I had seen her hand. Now it was time to play mine. The drive back down to Manhattan was a masterclass in compartmentalization. I did not feel angry or betrayed. I felt a cold, sharp, hyper-focused clarity. I navigated the heavy afternoon traffic with mechanical precision, my brain outlining the exact sequence of events required to permanently dismantle my family. The fraudulent lien was the foundational pillar of their entire extortion strategy. They believed it effectively paralyzed me, forcing me into a corner where liquidating the asset was my only viable option to avoid a protracted, bleeding legal battle. They were relying heavily on the psychological terror of a courtroom. They forgot that I maneuvered through financial combat zones every single day of my professional life. I arrived at Mr. Harrison's office just as the sun began to dip below the city skyline. He was waiting for me in his private conference room, the emergency order to show cause already printed and resting on the polished glass table. He had reviewed the photographs I sent from the estate and was visibly shaking his head at the sheer, unadulterated stupidity of my sister's actions. I just got off a conference call with Arthur Vance, Mr. Harrison said, handing me a copy of the legal filing. I presented him with our emergency order and demanded he immediately produce the written equity contract signed by you. I informed him that if he failed to produce the document by 3 o'clock this afternoon, we would not only file this order with the judge, but we would immediately petition the state bar for severe disciplinary action regarding his filing of a demonstrably fraudulent encumbrance. I took off my coat, draping it over the back of a leather chair. And how exactly did Mr. Vance respond to that threat? Mr. Harrison let out a sharp, predatory chuckle. He completely folded Clara. Arthur Vance is a bottom-feeding nuisance lawyer. He thrives on intimidating unprotected homeowners. The absolute second he realized you had retained premium corporate counsel, he panicked. He admitted on the recorded line that Richard and Patricia never provided him with a signed contract. They merely assured him verbally that the wire transfer was an equity stake. I drafted a voluntary release of lien immediately. Vance signed it electronically 20 minutes ago to save his own license. The county clerk has already processed the release. Your title is completely clear. There is absolutely no legal hold on your Hudson Valley property. I stared at the confirmation document in my hands. The heavy, suffocating threat my parents had tried to wrap around my neck had been effortlessly severed in less than an afternoon. They had played their absolute best card, and it had crumbled into dust the moment it met actual resistance. Are we countersuing for legal fees immediately? Mr. Harrison asked, ready to launch the next phase of the offensive. I have the paperwork drafted to hold them entirely liable for the cost of this ridiculous stunt. I placed the confirmation document back onto the glass table and looked up at my attorney. No, we are not going to countersue them today. In fact, I do not want you to send them any formal notification that the lien has been successfully dissolved. Mr. Harrison frowned, clearly confused by my directive. Clara Arthur Vance signed the release. He is legally obligated to inform his clients that their claim has been vacated. You cannot prevent their lawyer from speaking to them. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Arthur Vance is a coward who just narrowly avoided a major bar association complaint. Do you honestly think he is going to rush to the phone to tell his aggressive, broke, and delusional clients that he instantly surrendered their only leverage? He will avoid their calls for days. He will stall. He will hide behind legal jargon because he does not want to deal with my father's screaming rage. By the time they actually realize the lien is completely gone, it will be far too late. I need them to believe they are still winning. I need them to remain absolutely intoxicated by their own perceived success. Mr. Harrison studied my face, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the deeply calculated strategy forming behind my request. You want them completely blinded by their own arrogance while you maneuver your assets. Exactly, I confirmed. Brittany is currently standing on my lawn planning a massive vow renewal ceremony because she genuinely believes the house is already hers. My parents are likely celebrating right now, assuming I am crying in a corner, desperately trying to figure out how to pay them off. I want them to stay in that exact psychological state. Arrogance breeds extreme carelessness. While they are busy picking out floral arrangements and popping cheap champagne, I am going to execute a financial transfer they will never see coming. I thanked Mr. Harrison for his swift and brutal efficiency, gathered my cleared property documents, and left the law firm. The night air was freezing, but I felt a burning heat radiating through my chest. The defensive phase of this war was officially over. My property was secure, my title was flawless, and my parents' primary weapon had been silently neutralized. Now it was time to build the ultimate offensive weapon. I returned to my penthouse apartment and immediately opened my encrypted work laptop. I bypassed my usual client portfolios and opened a blank secure dossier. If my family wanted to play games with fraudulent financial claims, I was going to show them what a real financial execution looked like. I began compiling every single piece of data I could legally access regarding Jamal's surgical practice, his public hospital affiliations, and the known structure of the Dubois family wealth. I cross-referenced public property records, looking for the exact corporate entity Jamal's mother utilized to manage her vast real estate holdings. I needed a direct line to the true power in that family. I did not need Jamal, who was exhausted, overworked, and easily manipulated by my sister's tears. I needed the architect of his family's legacy. I needed the matriarch. It took me 3 hours of meticulous digital digging to bypass the public-facing assistants and locate the private direct contact information for Mrs. Josephine Dubois. I stared at her elegant name on my glowing screen. She was a woman who commanded absolute respect in every circle, a woman who protected her family's bloodline and generational assets with lethal precision. She was the perfect weapon, and I was about to hand her the exact ammunition she needed to destroy the parasites feeding on her son. I reached for my phone, took one final breath, and began to dial. The line rang exactly twice before connecting. The voice that answered was crisp, measured, and carried an undeniable weight of quiet authority. Josephine Dubois speaking. Mrs. Dubois, this is Clara, Brittany's older sister. A chilling, prolonged silence hung on the line. Josephine had always viewed my family with polite but deeply veiled disdain. Clara. To what do I owe the pleasure? I need exactly 20 minutes of your time tomorrow morning, I said, deliberately stripping away any familiarity. It concerns a severe financial hemorrhage from Jamal's private trust accounts, orchestrated by my sister and my parents. I have physical documentation requiring your immediate attention. Another silence, much heavier this time. The Oak Room, 79th and 5th. 8 o'clock sharp. Ask for my private table. I will be there. She disconnected the call before I could say another single word. I spent the entire night meticulously building a dossier. I printed the court records of the fraudulent lien my parents attempted to place on my property. I printed the public foreclosure notices regarding their suburban estate. I drafted a timeline cross-referencing my parents' sudden financial crisis with the $300,000 bridge loan. I compiled everything into a black leather binder. This was a forensic financial audit handed directly to the ultimate auditor. The next morning, the Manhattan air was bitterly cold. I dressed with the aggressive precision I used for acquiring high-net-worth clients. A tailored charcoal suit, minimal jewelry. I needed Josephine to see me as a fellow strategist, not a chaotic extension of my parents' embarrassing circus. I arrived at the Oak Room 10 minutes early. The establishment was an enclave of old money smelling of polished mahogany. The maitre d' guided me to a secluded glass-enclosed private alcove at the back. Josephine Dubois was already seated inside. At 60, she was a striking, formidable presence. She wore an emerald green dress, her posture perfectly straight, her dark eyes appraising. She possessed the generational grace my mother had spent her life desperately trying to mimic. Josephine had always seen right through my parents' fake suburban facade. She tolerated them at the wedding with a tight smile and maintained massive distance ever since. "Good morning, Clara Josephine," said her voice smooth but edged. She did not offer her hand. "Have a seat. Coffee is ordered. Now tell me exactly why you interrupted my morning to discuss my son's finances." I sat down, placed my binder on the tablecloth, and looked her directly in the eyes. "Mrs. Dubois, my family is executing a coordinated financial fraud against your son. Jamal is working consecutive double shifts because he believes he needs to replenish $300,000 to his private accounts before your mandatory annual trust audit next week." Josephine's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Her manicured hands remained perfectly still. "Jamal's accounts are scheduled for review. Continue. Brittany convinced Jamal to authorize a $300,000 bridge loan to my father last August," I explained steadily. "She told Jamal my father was facing a catastrophic business supply chain failure regarding overseas shipping containers. She swore the money would be paid back with interest." Josephine let out a soft, humorless laugh holding no warmth. "Your father does not operate a supply chain business. He was laid off from an insurance firm 3 years ago." "Exactly," I said. "There were no shipping containers. My parents are completely broke, living wildly beyond their means for a decade. Brittany did not facilitate a business loan. She actively embezzled that money and funneled it directly to my parents to fund their lifestyle. They blew through your son's money in less than 12 months, spending it on luxury cars, kitchen renovations, and a lavish vacation to the Maldives." Josephine did not gasp. The temperature in the private alcove simply dropped 10 degrees. The aristocratic matriarch was processing the betrayal of her son, analyzing the data with ruthless efficiency. "And now," Josephine said dangerously quietly, "the money is entirely gone, and the audit is approaching." "Correct?" I nodded. "The bank is actively foreclosing on my parents' suburban home. Brittany is completely cornered. She needs to replace Jamal's money immediately to hide her theft from you, and she needs capital to save my parents from homelessness." So they hatched a new plan. I opened the binder and slid a document across the table. "This is a fraudulent legal lien my parents attempted to place on my $1.5 million Hudson Valley estate 3 days ago," I explained. "They hired an extortion lawyer to claim equity in my property. They assumed I would panic sell my house and hand them a massive cash settlement. They planned to use the proceeds to quietly reimburse Jamal's account and pay off their mortgage before you or Jamal ever discovered the truth." Josephine picked up the document, her sharp eyes scanning the legal jargon. "And your property? Is it currently encumbered?" "No," I replied. "I am a corporate wealth manager. I crushed their fraudulent lien in 4 hours. My title is completely clear. But I instructed my attorney not to notify them that their hold was dissolved. They currently believe they are winning. Brittany is so breathtakingly delusional that she was standing on my front lawn yesterday with event planners measuring my property to host a lavish 5-year vow renewal ceremony for her and Jamal. She actually believes she is going to steal my house and use it to impress you. Josephine slowly lowered the document. The silence between us was heavy charged with unspoken understanding. Two highly capable, fiercely independent women looking at the exact same pathetic suburban parasites. My son is a brilliant surgeon, Josephine said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. But he has a blind spot regarding the people he loves. He believes the best in his wife, and she weaponized his generosity to bleed him dry. She made a complete fool of my son Clara. And your parents insulted my intelligence by assuming they could launder my family's wealth to fund their pathetic country club facade. I entirely agree, I said, closing the binder. Which is exactly why I did not come here just to warn you. I came here to propose an unexpected alliance. I have a strategy that will permanently sever my family's access to your son's wealth, completely humiliate them, and leave them with absolutely nothing. Josephine leaned back in her chair, a slow, dangerous smile finally touching the corners of her elegant mouth. I am absolutely listening. I am absolutely listening, Josephine said, leaning forward and resting her elbows on the white tablecloth. The ambient noise of the exclusive restaurant seemed to fade completely, leaving only the sharp, focused energy between us. I opened the leather binder and slid a thick stack of printed financial records across the table. I am a wealth manager, I explained, keeping my voice low and steady. When Jamal mentioned the exact date and amount of the supposed bridge loan, I knew exactly where to look. Brittany is not a sophisticated criminal. She is lazy and entirely arrogant. She left a digital paper trail so wide a first-year accounting student could follow it. Josephine picked up the top document. It was a copy of a wire transfer receipt. I had used my firm's highly advanced forensic software to legally trace the routing numbers Jamal unwittingly provided when he logged into the hospital portal months ago. Look at the timestamp on the initial transfer, I instructed. August 14th. $300,000 moved from Jamal's private investment trust directly into Brittany's personal checking account. Now look at the next page. Josephine turned the page, her eyes scanning the highlighted lines with lethal speed. 48 hours later, I continued. $250,000 was wired from Brittany's checking account straight into Richard and Patricia's joint account at their local suburban bank. The remaining $50,000 was immediately routed to a luxury travel agency in Manhattan. That was the deposit for the Maldives vacation she took with your son. She used his own money to pay for a lavish trip, pretending she earned it through her pathetic social media sponsorships. The silence in the private alcove was absolute. Josephine did not blink. She turned to the next set of documents, which meticulously detailed my parents' subsequent spending spree. My parents did not use that money to save a dying supply chain business. I stated, pointing to a series of massive transactions. They paid off $60,000 in outstanding country club dues. They spent $80,000 completely remodeling their kitchen with imported Italian marble to impress their neighbors. They dropped another $40,000 on a down payment for a new luxury SUV for my father. They burned through $350,000 in less than a year just to maintain the illusion that they belong in the same social stratosphere as your family. I watched Josephine process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. Her face remained a masterclass in aristocratic composure, but the temperature in the room plummeted. The quiet, controlled fury radiating from her was genuinely terrifying. This was a woman who had spent decades ruthlessly protecting and expanding her family's generational wealth. She had navigated vicious corporate boardrooms and hostile acquisitions. Now she was looking at definitive proof that a superficial, entitled suburbanite was actively bleeding her son dry. Jamal is a gifted orthopedic surgeon, Josephine said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. He spends 12 hours a day in the operating room, reconstructing shattered spines and shattered limbs. He has dedicated his entire existence to saving lives. He misses holidays. He misses family dinners. He runs himself into the ground because he believes in his calling. And while my son is covered in blood and sweat in a surgical theater, your sister is sitting by a country club pool, draining his legacy to buy imported marble for her fraudulent parents. It is worse than that, I replied smoothly. Jamal told me he is currently working back-to-back double shifts, completely exhausting himself, because Brittany convinced him they need to replace the missing $300,000 before your trust audit next Friday. He is literally killing himself to cover up her embezzlement because he genuinely believes it was a failed business loan. Josephine's manicured hands gripped the edge of the table. Her knuckles turned white. She played him perfectly, she murmured, her voice laced with a lethal, quiet rage. She manipulated his generous nature and weaponized his loyalty. She knew he would never question a family emergency, and she knew he would work himself to death to protect her from my scrutiny. Exactly, I nodded. And now the money is gone. My parents stopped paying their actual mortgage months ago to keep up appearances. The bank is foreclosing. Your audit is looming. Brittany is completely trapped. She needs a massive, untraceable influx of cash right now. Which brings us to your $1.5 million estate. Josephine concluded, her sharp mind instantly connecting the final dots. They filed the fraudulent lien to paralyze your assets. They plan to extort you for the cash, use it to secretly reimburse Jamal's trust account before my audit, pay off their suburban mortgage, and keep the remainder to fund Brittany's lavish vow renewal ceremony. They think they have me backed into a corner, I said. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed I would fight them emotionally. They assumed I would scream, cry, and eventually negotiate a settlement just to save my property from a prolonged legal battle. But I do not fight emotionally. I fight financially. Josephine leaned back in her chair, her dark eyes locking onto mine with profound respect. You dissolved their lien already, but you kept it a secret. You want them to walk blindly into a trap. If I expose Brittany right now with just these papers, I explained, she will cry. She will play the victim. She will tell Jamal that my parents manipulated her, that she was just trying to save them from homelessness. Jamal is exhausted and deeply in love with her. He might forgive her. He might pay off my parents' debt just to make the nightmare go away. We cannot let that happen. We need to expose them at the absolute height of their arrogance. We need a public, undeniable execution of their facade. Josephine smiled coldly. Tell me exactly how we destroy them. I did not hesitate. I sell you my house, I said, keeping my gaze locked on hers. I sell my $1.5 million Hudson Valley estate directly to your private real estate holding company. An all-cash expedited transaction executed entirely behind closed doors within the next 7 days. My parents and my sister currently believe they have me cornered. They think the fraudulent lien they filed will force me to sign the property deed over to them. I need to guarantee that when they arrive at that estate expecting to claim their stolen prize, the property legally, undeniably, and exclusively belongs to the Dubois family trust. Josephine slowly folded her manicured hands together, resting her chin gracefully on her fingertips. You want to execute a blind transfer. You want to shift the massive asset off your ledger and onto mine, ensuring your own liquid capital is perfectly protected, while simultaneously handing me the absolute ultimate leverage over my deceptive daughter-in-law and her greedy parents. Exactly. I confirmed, sliding a fresh folder across the table containing the official appraisal and the unencumbered deed documents Mr. Harrison had prepared. The property is highly desirable, historically significant, and perfectly maintained. It is a solid, appreciating asset for your portfolio. You wire me the $1.5 million in cash. I secure my financial independence and step entirely out of the blast radius. You get the deed. When Brittany and my parents inevitably show up at the estate to claim their victory and host their ridiculous vow renewal, they will not find me cowering in the living room. They will find the matriarch of the family they have been actively defrauding holding the keys to the kingdom. Josephine picked up the appraisal document, her dark eyes scanning the structural details, the acreage, and the impressive market valuation. She was a woman who dealt in aggressive acquisitions, and I was offering her the most satisfying acquisition of her entire life. It was a flawless tactical maneuver. Brittany had insulted the Dubois' name by using Jamal as a personal bank account, stealing her moment of triumph and exposing her embezzlement on the very ground she intended to use as her social coronation was poetic justice. My son is blinded by his own exhausting schedule and a misplaced sense of marital duty. Josephine said, her voice smooth and chillingly calm. If I confront him with paper trails in our family home, Brittany will cry. She will spin a massive narrative of manipulation, claiming her parents forced her into the embezzlement, and she will beg for his forgiveness. Jamal might try to protect her to avoid the scandal of a public divorce. But if I catch her trespassing on my own property, aggressively celebrating her theft, with the very parents who orchestrated the cover-up, Jamal will have no choice but to see the absolute, unvarnished truth. The visual shock will break the spell she has over him. She set the appraisal down and looked at me with a newfound, profound respect. You are incredibly ruthless, Clara. I must admit I misjudged you at the wedding. I assumed you were cut from the same superficial cloth as your mother and your sister. I take that as a massive compliment, I replied, offering a tight professional smile. I survived my family by learning to recognize bad investments and cutting my losses rapidly. Right now, Brittany and my parents are a massive liability I am permanently removing from my balance sheet. But they are actively draining your son. This transaction gives you the exact weapon you need to amputate the infection before it spreads any further into your family legacy. I will purchase the property. Josephine declared, her decision made with the swift, uncompromising authority of a seasoned executive. I will instruct my lead corporate attorney to contact your Mr. Harrison immediately. We will bypass the standard 30-day closing window. Since this is an all-cash transaction between two willing private parties with a completely clear title, we can legally fast-track the deed transfer and file it with the county clerk by Thursday afternoon. Perfect. I nodded. We must maintain absolute radio silence. The entire trap depends on their blinding arrogance. They cannot know the lien was dissolved, and they certainly cannot know the property changed hands. If they catch even a whisper of this transaction, they will scatter. Brittany will empty whatever is left in Jamal's accounts, and my parents will flee the state before the bank foreclosures hit. We need them overconfident, greedy, and gathered in one single location. How do you propose we herd them into the slaughterhouse? Josephine asked, her eyes glittering with predatory anticipation. I will play the defeated victim, I explained, outlining the final phase of the strategy. Tomorrow evening, I will send a message to our family group chat. I will tell them the legal pressure broke me. I will claim I am physically and emotionally exhausted, and I am surrendering the house to settle the debt. I will invite them to the Hudson Valley property next Friday at noon to receive the keys and sign the transfer paperwork. They will be so intoxicated by their own perceived victory that they will not hesitate. They will show up with champagne event planners and moving boxes, and I will be waiting inside the foyer. Josephine finished, a slow, dangerous smile finally breaking across her elegant features. I will bring my personal security detail, my attorneys, and Jamal. I will pull my son out of the surgical ward and drag him up to the valley myself if I have to. He needs to witness the depth of his wife's deception firsthand. We will stand united and we will watch their pathetic suburban facade burn to the ground. The deal is sealed, Clara. You have your cash and I have my ultimate weapon. This is exactly how we win this war. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of hyper-focused productivity. I left the private alcove of the Oak Room with a renewed sense of lethal purpose. Josephine Dubois had not just agreed to my proposal, she had weaponized it with the full weight of her generational resources. I walked out onto Fifth Avenue, pulled my phone from my pocket, and immediately dialed Mr. Harrison. He answered with his usual brisk efficiency, expecting a routine update on our defensive posture. Instead, I gave him a directive that completely altered the battlefield. I told him to draft a commercial deed of transfer immediately. I explained that I had secured a private all-cash buyer who was waiving all inspections contingencies and standard closing delays. I needed the property shifted out of my name and legally transferred to a corporate entity by Thursday afternoon. Mr. Harrison did not ask unnecessary questions. He simply asked for the exact legal name of the purchasing entity to begin drafting the transfer documents immediately. I provided him with the detailed corporate registry information for Onyx Heritage Holdings, the primary real estate LLC, controlled entirely by Josephine Dubois. Within an hour, the elite corporate attorneys representing the Dubois Family Trust had established a secure communication channel with Mr. Harrison. The sheer velocity of the transaction was breathtaking. This was what real wealth and absolute power looked like in motion. There were no shady backroom deals, no desperate leverage tactics, and no fraudulent liens filed by bottom-feeding lawyers. This was a clean surgical strike, executed by top-tier legal professionals who understood the assignment perfectly. They worked entirely behind closed doors, drafting the bill of sale, the transfer tax documents, and the new deed with flawless precision. Because my title had been successfully cleared of my parents' ridiculous lien the day before, there were zero legal hurdles to clear. The property was a pristine asset ready for immediate transfer. I spent the next 2 days coordinating exclusively through encrypted emails and brief, highly confidential phone calls. I continued to show up at my financial advisory firm, managing my clients' portfolios and attending meetings as if nothing in my personal life had shifted. My professional mask remained firmly in place, while the paperwork was finalized in the shadows. On Wednesday morning, I arrived at Mr. Harrison's office to finalize the execution of the contract. The conference room table, which had previously held the fabricated extortion documents from my parents, now held a neat, sophisticated stack of legitimate real estate contracts. Josephine was not physically present. She did not need to be. Her lead corporate counsel sat across from me, reviewing the final clauses with a practiced eye. The atmosphere in the room was clinical, professional, and entirely devoid of the toxic, screaming, emotional manipulation that characterized every single financial dealing involving my family. I picked up the heavy black pen Mr. Harrison offered me. I looked down at the signature line on the deed transfer document. By signing this paper, I was giving up the physical sanctuary I had purchased with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I was handing over the historic estate I had painstakingly restored room by room over the last 5 years. A weaker person might have hesitated, clinging to the sentimental value of the bricks and mortar, but I felt absolutely no hesitation whatsoever. I pressed the pen to the heavy paper and signed my name. With that single stroke, I amputated the infected limb of my family tree. I traded a physical structure for absolute impenetrable financial freedom. The documents were immediately notarized and sealed in a premium leather folder by the legal team. Josephine's attorney initiated the wire transfer right there at the table. We waited in comfortable silence for exactly 14 minutes. Then my phone vibrated with a secure notification from my private banking application. I unlocked the screen and opened my primary holding account. The balance had just increased by exactly $1.5 million. The funds had cleared completely. There was no mortgage to pay off, no broker fees to deduct, and no hidden penalties to calculate. The cash was entirely liquid, fully secured, and completely untouchable by anyone bearing my maiden name. I let out a slow, steady breath. The psychological weight I had carried since that catastrophic Thanksgiving dinner vanished entirely. My parents could scream, threaten, and throw adult tantrums all they wanted. They had absolutely zero leverage left. They could not touch my accounts. They could not touch my career. And they could no longer touch my property. The money was securely integrated into my heavily protected financial network, insulated by massive walls of corporate security and specialized banking protocols designed to repel any unauthorized external inquiries. Mr. Harrison confirmed that a courier was already en route to the Hudson Valley County Clerk to formally file the new deed. By the time the courthouse closed that afternoon, the public records would permanently reflect that Clara no longer owned the estate. The trap was now fully built and perfectly concealed beneath layers of corporate bureaucracy. The historic property, the sprawling lawns, the wraparound porch where Brittany was currently planning her delusional vow renewal ceremony, it all legally belonged to Jamal's mother. The stage was set for the absolute destruction of their suburban facade. I shook hands with the attorneys, gathered my personal copies of the transaction, and walked out into the bright Manhattan afternoon. I had my cash safely locked away. Josephine had her ultimate weapon secured. The transition of power was fully complete without my parents suspecting a single thing. They were still blindly marching toward a terrifying cliff edge they could not even see. Now it was finally time to cast the bait and invite my exceptionally greedy family to their own spectacular execution. I pulled out my phone and prepared to send the most deceptive message of my entire life. Standing on the busy Manhattan sidewalk, letting the freezing city wind whip around my tailored coat, I opened the family group chat. The chat history was a toxic digital wasteland. It had been completely silent since the explosive Thanksgiving dinner, save for a few passive-aggressive links my mother had forwarded about the importance of family loyalty. To make this final trap work, I had to completely swallow my professional pride. I had to give them exactly what their narcissistic personalities craved the most. They needed to see me broken. They needed to genuinely believe that their aggressive, fraudulent legal tactics had utterly crushed my independent spirit and drained my financial resources. I stood near the entrance of a high-end boutique, deliberately ignoring the bustling pedestrians flowing around me and focused entirely on crafting the perfect illusion. I typed and deleted several drafts. It had to sound perfectly pathetic, emotionally exhausted, and entirely defeated. It needed to mimic the tone of a woman who had finally realized she could not outrun her powerful parents. I took a deep breath and began typing the final version. Mom, Dad, Brittany, you win. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot fight Arthur Vance and the court system. The legal fees are already draining my checking accounts, and the constant anxiety is completely destroying my health. The lien has frozen my assets just like you planned, and I have no way out. I am officially waving the white flag. I paused, reading the words back to myself, ensuring the tone was sufficiently desperate before adding the ultimate bait. I will give you the house. If you drop the lawsuit today and agree to remove the lien, I will sign the deed over to you so you can pay off your debt and keep your suburban home. I am emotionally exhausted. I am beaten, and I just want this massive nightmare to end. Meet me at the Hudson Valley Estate this Friday at exactly noon. I will have the keys and the final transfer paperwork ready to sign. Please just take the property and leave me alone forever. I stared at the block of text on my glowing screen. It was an absolute masterpiece of forced submission. I pressed send. The message appeared in the blue chat bubble. Instantly, the little delivery indicators popped up at the bottom of the screen. Delivered. Read. I stood completely still on the pavement, watching the screen with the cold, calculated patience of a sniper. Within 10 seconds, 3 typing indicators appeared simultaneously. Richard, Patricia, and Brittany were all frantically scrambling to respond. The sheer, unadulterated greed was palpable even through a digital interface. They were acting like starving scavengers who had just been thrown a massive piece of premium meat. I could practically hear the triumphant, arrogant screaming echoing through my parents' heavily mortgaged suburban living room. My father was the first to reply. His text was predictably arrogant, demanding, and entirely devoid of any parental warmth or sympathy. It is about time you came to your senses, Clara. This is the only mature decision you could have made. We will have our attorney prepare the final transfer documents to ensure you do not try any last-minute tricks. See you on Friday. Be punctual. Do not make us wait. My mother chimed in a few seconds later, attempting to mask her extreme financial desperation with a sickening layer of fake maternal concern. We know this is incredibly hard for you, darling, but family always comes first. You are doing the right thing for our legacy and our survival. We will help you pack your personal things into boxes on Friday. We love you. I actually let out a sharp, genuine laugh right there on the street. The hypocrisy was absolutely staggering. She was offering to help me pack my belongings out of a home she was actively stealing, wrapping her theft in a pathetic bow of maternal affection. Finally, Brittany sent her message. She could not even pretend to be polite or accommodating. Thank God you finally stopped being so unbelievably selfish. Jamal and I will be there on Friday to properly inspect the grounds for the vow renewal ceremony. Make sure the place is completely clean before you hand over the keys. I do not want to deal with your mess. I locked my phone, the screen going black, and slid it back into my deep coat pocket. The bait had been swallowed whole. The hook was set so deep in their jaws they would never be able to rip it out. I hailed a black car and directed the driver to my new penthouse apartment. As the glittering city rolled by outside my tinted window, I allowed myself to fully process the magnitude of what was about to happen. By demanding I meet them at the house on Friday at noon, I had guaranteed they would all be in one place, completely isolated from their usual suburban audience and entirely vulnerable to the ambush Josephine and I had meticulously planned. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted a senior financial advisor. They thought their cheap extortion lawyer had managed to financially paralyze a woman who moved millions of dollars before her morning coffee. Their blinding arrogance was their fatal flaw. They never once stopped to question why I capitulated so quickly. They never stopped to wonder if the sudden surrender was a trap. Their profound entitlement blinded them to every single glaring red flag. I arrived at my luxury high-rise building. The concierge greeted me warmly, holding the heavy glass door open. I took the private keycard access elevator all the way up to my penthouse. The expansive panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline stretched out before me, a glittering landscape of undeniable success and absolute independence. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, deliberately skipping the wine because I needed my mind razor sharp for the next 48 hours. I walked over to my kitchen island and opened my secure laptop one last time for the evening. I sent a brief, heavily encrypted email directly to Josephine Dubois. The message contained no pleasantries, only logistical facts. The targets have accepted the invitation. Friday at noon is officially confirmed. They are bringing the event planners. Bring your security team. Bring your son. Josephine replied within 2 flat minutes. The screen illuminated with her response. A single terrifyingly crisp word. Excellent. I closed the laptop with a satisfying snap. The quiet of my penthouse was beautifully deafening. I thought about my father, probably drinking his expensive red wine, bragging to my mother about how he had successfully broken my rebellious spirit and saved his suburban kingdom. I thought about Brittany furiously pinning floral arrangements and champagne towers on her digital mood boards, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was about to discover her massive embezzlement scheme. They had exactly 48 hours left to enjoy their delusions of grandeur. 48 hours left to pretend they were wealthy, successful, and powerful. When the clock struck noon on Friday, their entire universe was going to violently collapse. They had demanded my house. They had demanded my utter submission. I was going to give them a financial and social execution they would remember for the rest of their miserable, bankrupt lives. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in watching absolute greed consume itself. The family group chat suddenly erupted into a vibrant festival of profound arrogance. They were practically tripping over each other to claim the ultimate victory. My father, Richard, was the loudest. He sent a rambling text outlining his grand financial vision, completely ignoring the fact that he was actively stealing this property from his daughter. I just got off the phone with our accountant. He typed his words, dripping with unearned confidence. Once we take possession of the deed on Friday, we are going to leverage the estate immediately. We will clear the bank liens on the suburban house and invest the remaining capital. It is a foolproof venture. We will double the remaining equity in 6 months. I read his message and felt a genuine wave of clinical disgust. He was drowning in his own failures, yet believed he was a genius. He was already planning to gamble away the fictional leftovers of my hard-earned money. My mother immediately chimed in, complimenting his delusion with her brand of toxic suburban vanity. "That is wonderful news, Richard," she replied. I told the country club ladies our family portfolio is undergoing a massive restructuring. I even booked an appointment with the interior designer for next Tuesday. Since we are saving the main house, we absolutely need to finalize the imported marble installation for the kitchen. Clara, do not worry about your furniture. We will hire movers to box up your things and send them to your apartment. We want the space entirely cleared out so Brittany can start her event planning without any clutter. She was casually evicting me while bragging about buying imported marble with my stolen money. But nothing compared to the sheer audacity of my sister. Brittany did not just confine her gloating to the private family chat. She took her delusions completely public. I opened a fake social media account I used specifically to monitor her public profile. Her page was an explosion of digital narcissism. She uploaded a video montage to her stories set to an obnoxious, triumphant pop song. The video featured photographs she had taken while trespassing on my front lawn 2 days prior. She was posing in her cashmere coat, pointing at the historic facade of my home. The bold, glittering text overlaid on the video read, "Secured the ultimate venue for our 5-year vow renewal. Welcoming everyone to the new Dubois family country estate. God is so good." The comments section beneath her post was a sickening echo chamber of fake validation. Her superficial influencer friends and distant socialites were showering her with praise. OMG, Brittany. It is absolutely stunning, one comment read. You and Jamal deserve the absolute best, read another. Brittany was actively replying to every single comment, feeding her massive ego. Thank you so much, she typed back. Jamal and I have been looking for the perfect weekend getaway property. It requires a massive renovation to meet our standards, but we are so blessed to add this historic gem to our real estate portfolio. She was publicly claiming that she and Jamal had purchased my home. She was absorbing the praise and the envy of thousands of strangers, building her entire online identity on a foundation of absolute fraud. The level of pathological lying required to post those words was staggering. She was stealing from her overworked husband, stealing from her older sister, and wrapping it all in a shiny, heavily filtered digital bow. Notably, Jamal was completely absent from every single social media post and the family group chat. He was not tagged in her stories, and he had not responded to a single message. I knew exactly why. Jamal was currently buried in a brutal 48-hour surgical rotation at the hospital. He was desperately operating on shattered bones and saving lives, trying to earn back the $300,000 his wife had already embezzled. He had absolutely no idea that his wife was online, bragging to the entire world about a fake country estate, or that his mother was currently mobilizing a legal strike team to annihilate her. I watched the digital circus unfold from the pristine silence of my Manhattan penthouse. I did not feel a single ounce of anger anymore. Anger is an unpredictable, volatile emotion. What I felt was absolute surgical precision. I was a financial executioner watching the condemned happily build their own gallows. I spent Thursday evening reviewing the final transfer documents from Josephine Dubois. The $1.5 million remained perfectly secure in my private offshore accounts, yielding interest, while my family celebrated their imaginary wealth. I carefully packed a small, elegant leather briefcase for the following day. I placed my car keys, a sleek black pen, and the original, now obsolete brass keys to the Hudson Valley estate inside. I wanted everything to be perfectly organized for the handover. I sent one final brief message to the family group chat just before midnight to ensure they were fully locked in. I have packed my personal belongings. I typed, maintaining the illusion of total defeat. I will meet you at the front gates tomorrow at exactly noon. Please do not be late. I want to hand over the property and leave immediately. Richard replied within 10 seconds. We will be there, Clara. Make sure the property is spotless. I locked my phone screen and set the device on the marble kitchen island. I poured myself a single glass of expensive sparkling water, walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, and looked out over the glittering Manhattan skyline. They were coming for a victory lap. They were bringing their event planners, their greed, and their boundless entitlement. They thought they had finally broken the independent daughter who refused to play by their toxic rules. They had no idea that they were walking straight into a massive, impenetrable concrete wall tomorrow. Executing a flawless financial disappearing act requires much more than simply transferring digits across secure banking ledgers. It requires absolute physical elimination. As I stood looking out over the Manhattan skyline on Thursday night, the sheer physical exhaustion of the past 72 hours finally began to settle into my shoulders. While my mother had been busy picking out imported marble slabs with stolen money, and while my sister had been dancing around my front lawn for social media, I had orchestrated a completely covert relocation. A team of premium, highly discreet logistics professionals had arrived at the Hudson Valley estate at exactly midnight on Tuesday. I paid them a massive premium for their silence and their speed. I did not pack my life away with tears or sentimental hesitation. I packed up my home with the ruthless, cold efficiency of a corporate auditor, archiving closed files. We worked entirely in the dead of night to ensure absolute secrecy. I could not risk a nosy neighbor calling my parents, and I certainly could not risk Brittany driving up for another impromptu venue inspection. The movers wrapped my antique furniture, boxed my personal library, and loaded my curated art collection into unmarked trucks under the cover of darkness. As the rooms of the historic estate were stripped bare, the house began to echo. The warmth and personality I had painstakingly injected into the property were entirely removed, leaving behind nothing but a beautiful, sterile shell. It was no longer my home. It was simply a physical asset waiting to be handed over to Josephine Dubois. I walked through the empty rooms one last time, my footsteps clicking sharply against the bare hardwood floors. I felt a profound sense of closure. I was not losing a house. I was shedding a massive liability. Once the trucks were loaded and dispatched to a secure climate-controlled storage facility, I immediately turned my attention to cementing my new reality. I had previously been renting a comfortable upscale apartment in the city to stay close to my financial advisory firm, but the $1.5 million cash injection from Josephine significantly altered my permanent housing parameters. I demanded total security, impenetrable privacy, and unquestionable luxury. By Wednesday morning, I was sitting across from a top-tier luxury real estate broker in a glass conference room overlooking Central Park. He handed me a thick stack of leasing documents for a stunning penthouse unit in a highly secure building. The property featured private elevator access, round-the-clock concierge service, and floor-to-ceiling windows, providing a panoramic view of the entire city. I did not need to negotiate or scramble for financing. I simply reviewed the lease agreement with my usual professional scrutiny, picked up my pen, and signed my name. I slid a certified cashier's check across the mahogany desk to cover the first year of rent in full. The broker was visibly stunned by the frictionless all-cash transaction. This penthouse was not a desperate status symbol meant to impress shallow country club socialites. It was a fortress. It was a sky-high citadel funded entirely by my own intelligence, resilience, and unyielding financial independence. My family had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, attempting to convince me that I was a failure because I did not fit into their toxic suburban mold. Yet here I was, signing a lease on a property that cost more annually than my father had ever earned in a single year, utilizing funds secured by outsmarting their criminal conspiracy. I calmly directed the professional moving team to safely deliver my most essential belongings directly to the luxurious new penthouse that exact same afternoon, ensuring my complete comfort. Now standing in my newly furnished kitchen on Thursday night, the reality of my absolute freedom finally washed over me. The space was immaculate, quiet, and entirely mine. I set down my glass of sparkling water and walked over to my custom wine fridge. I reached for a bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon that I had been saving for a truly spectacular occasion. I pulled the cork, the satisfying pop echoing in the quiet luxury of my penthouse. I poured a generous measure of the dark red wine into a crystal glass, watching the heavy liquid swirl and catch the city lights reflecting through the massive windows. The rich, bold aroma filled the air, grounding me in the present moment. Directly across the spotless marble kitchen island, my phone screen suddenly illuminated brightly once again. It vibrated aggressively against the cool, polished stone surface, demanding my attention. I picked up the device and glanced at the notifications. The family group chat was still an active rapid-fire stream of delusional planning and arrogant gloating. My mother was constantly sending multiple expensive links to premium catering companies, completely oblivious to reality. Brittany was demanding to know if the Hudson Valley estate had enough guest bathrooms to accommodate the Dubois' extended family. My father was arrogantly sending unsolicited, demanding advice about exactly how to properly clean the hardwood floors before their grand arrival. They were all violently buzzing with the frantic energy of parasites preparing to latch onto a brand new host. I took a slow sip of the Cabernet, savoring the complex flavors. I did not feel a single ounce of obligation to respond to their insanity. I pressed my thumb against the power button on the side of the device. A prompt appeared on the screen asking me to confirm the shutdown. I held the button down firmly until the glowing screen went completely black. The vibrations stopped. The notifications ceased. The toxic digital tether to my family was permanently severed. I placed the completely dead phone face down on the cold marble counter, took another long, satisfying sip of my rich wine and smiled. Let them all blindly gloat in the dark. Tomorrow at noon, the bright sun was going to absolutely burn them alive. Let them all blindly gloat in the dark. Tomorrow at noon, the bright sun was going to absolutely burn them alive. Friday morning brought a biting cold. At exactly 11:55, a caravan of premium vehicles crunched over the gravel of the Hudson Valley estate. Leading the procession was my father in his luxury sedan, a vehicle he had no business driving given his impending bankruptcy. Behind him was Brittany in her bright white Range Rover, followed by a commercial van belonging to the planners she hired, using stolen money. They drove onto the property like conquering monarchs, arriving to claim the spoils of a war they genuinely believed they had won. Car doors slammed shut, echoing across the frost-covered lawn. My father stepped out first, buttoning his wool overcoat with a smug expression. He took in the magnificent view of the historic structure. He eyed the wraparound porch like a desperate man finding a winning lottery ticket. Beside him, my mother emerged with flattened cardboard boxes and premium champagne. She wore a bright, triumphant smile, mentally decorating the foyer with imported marble she could not afford. Brittany leaped out of her SUV, clutching a thick clipboard. She shouted rapid-fire instructions to the planners climbing out of their van. "I want the champagne tower positioned exactly where we discussed," Brittany commanded, pointing toward the veranda. "We need to measure the entire main dining hall today. The Dubois family expects absolute perfection, and I will not let my sister's bad energy ruin the aesthetic of my vow renewal. You start unloading the equipment while my parents and I handle the eviction logistics." The three marched up the stone pathway toward the heavy oak front door, a unified front of unparalleled suburban entitlement. They did not notice the subtle silence of the property. They did not wonder why there was no moving truck parked in the driveway. They assumed my utter defeat meant I had already packed my bags and was sitting on the empty foyer floor, crying and waiting to surrender my kingdom. Their arrogance shielded them from processing any logical inconsistencies. My father stepped onto the front porch, his leather shoes striking the floorboards with aggressive thuds. He did not knock politely. He reached out and pressed the brass doorbell, holding his thumb against the button for 5 seconds. The resonant chime echoed through the massive house. When the door did not open immediately, he pounded his fist against the solid oak wood. "Clara," he barked, his voice booming with performative authority. "Open this door right now. We are freezing out here, and we do not have all day to cater to your emotional tantrums. Bring the paperwork and the keys out here immediately." My mother stepped up next to him, shifting the cardboard moving boxes to her other hip. She leaned toward the glass side panel of the door, peering into the shadows of the foyer. "Clara, darling, please do not make this any more difficult than it already is," she called out, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet fake maternal concern she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "The planners are waiting outside in the freezing cold. We brought boxes to help you pack whatever cheap clothes you have left inside. Just sign the papers, hand over the property, and we can move on from this unfortunate financial misunderstanding. We brought champagne to celebrate the family legacy being saved. Do not be selfish today." Brittany pushed past our mother, her patience evaporating after 30 seconds. She aggressively rattled the heavy brass handle, finding it securely locked. She slammed her hand against the doorframe. Clara opened the door. Brittany shrieked, her shrill voice slicing through the cold winter air. "You sent the text message. You agreed to the terms. Jamal is working a massive surgical shift today, and I am incredibly stressed trying to plan this event by myself. Stop playing these pathetic games and give us the house right now. You lost. Accept your failure and get off my new property before I call the local police and have you escorted off the premises for trespassing." The breathtaking irony of Brittany threatening to call the police for trespassing on a property she was actively trying to steal was a masterpiece of delusional, arrogant entitlement. My father pounded on the heavy oak door a second time, his face turning an angry shade of red against the bitter winter chill. He kicked the thick base of the door with the toe of his expensive leather shoe. "Clara, I am rapidly losing my patience," he roared. "I am the head of this family. I told you to have the paperwork ready by noon. You are deliberately disrespecting my time. If you do not open this door in the next 10 seconds, I will call our lawyer and have him execute the lien penalty to its maximum legal extent. You will walk away with absolutely nothing. Open this door immediately." They stood huddled together on the expansive wraparound porch, a toxic trinity of greed, desperation, and blinding arrogance. My father raised his fist to strike the heavy oak wood for a third time. My mother clutched her expensive champagne bottle, ready to pop the cork the second I handed over my financial independence. Brittany tapped her designer boot impatiently against the floorboards, holding her event planning clipboard like a royal scepter. They were convinced they were the absolute apex predators of this small suburban jungle. They believed they had successfully cornered their independent family member and were about to feast on the carcass of my real estate portfolio. The heavy brass lock on the inside of the front door suddenly clicked loudly. The sharp metallic sound echoed across the quiet porch, instantly silencing my father's aggressive shouting and my sister's shrill complaining. The heavy oak door finally began to swing open inward. The triumphant, greedy smiles immediately returned to their flushed faces. They eagerly stepped forward, completely ready to snatch the keys directly from my defeated, trembling hands. The door swung wide open, revealing the grand foyer. But it was not me standing there holding a set of keys. The person waiting inside the threshold was Mrs. Josephine Dubois. She stood with the absolute terrifying stillness of an apex predator. I remained safely out of sight on the landing of the interior staircase, watching my traps spring with flawless precision. Josephine was dressed in an immaculate structured ivory coat that screamed generational wealth. Flanking her were two massive, broad-shouldered men in dark tailored suits. They were private security contractors, their faces carved from granite, tracking my family with professional, lethal indifference. Standing directly behind Josephine was Jamal. He was still wearing a crisp dress shirt from his hospital shift, but he did not look exhausted anymore. He looked completely violently awake. His dark eyes were locked dead onto his wife, burning with a profound, unadulterated fury that seemed to consume the entire porch. His large hands were clenched tightly into fists at his sides. The absolute shock hit my family like a physical shockwave. The greedy, triumphant smiles instantly melted right off their flushed faces, sliding away to reveal pure, unfiltered horror. My father literally stumbled backward, his expensive leather shoes scraping awkwardly against the wooden floorboards. He blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing as his brain completely failed to process the visual information in front of him. My mother dropped her empty cardboard boxes, They hit the porch with a dull, pathetic thud. She clutched her bottle of champagne tightly to her chest, her eyes wide and terrified as she stared up at the formidable matriarch of the Dubois family. Brittany was entirely paralyzed. Her event planning clipboard slipped from her manicured fingers and clattered onto the ground. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. She stared at Jamal, her mouth hanging open desperately, searching his furious expression for the compliant, easily manipulated husband she had left at home that morning. She found absolutely nothing but cold, hard betrayal staring back at her. Josephine Dubois did not raise her voice. When she spoke, her words sliced through the freezing winter air with the precision of a surgical scalpel. "Are you entirely finished attempting to batter down my front door, Richard?" she asked, her tone smooth, aristocratic, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Or do you plan to continue behaving like a common street thug on my private property?" My father tried to puff out his chest, attempting to summon his usual aggressive suburban bluster, but he was completely out of his depth. "Josephine," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly, "what in the world are you doing inside my daughter's house? Clara told us to meet her here to sign the deed over to me to settle a family debt. You are trespassing on a private real estate transaction." The two massive security guards stepped forward simultaneously, narrowing the gap between Josephine and my parents. The physical intimidation was instant and highly effective. My father physically recoiled, putting his arm out to shield my mother. Josephine let out a soft, chilling laugh. "I am not trespassing, Richard," she stated with absolute terrifying clarity. "I am standing inside the foyer of a home that I purchased legally, cleanly, and entirely in cash. This property does not belong to Clara. And it certainly does not belong to a bankrupt, desperate fraud like you. It belongs to Onyx Heritage Holdings, which is a subsidiary of the Dubois Family Trust. I am the sole owner. You are the ones currently trespassing on my estate." My mother gasped loudly, pointing a shaking finger at Josephine. "That is a complete lie. Clara cannot sell this house. We have a legal lien filed against the deed." Our attorney froze her assets. "She has no right to transfer anything. You have been scammed, Josephine. Clara tricked you." Josephine did not even blink. "Your pathetic nuisance lawyer voluntarily dissolved your fraudulent lien 2 days ago. The absolute second, Clara's corporate attorney threatened him with severe Bar Association sanctions for filing a frivolous encumbrance. You have absolutely no legal hold on this property. You attempted to extort your own daughter to cover up your spectacular financial failures, and she completely outsmarted you." The reality of the situation began to violently crash down on my parents. Their eyes darted wildly around the porch. They had marched up to this house expecting to bully me into submission. Instead, they had walked completely blind into a highly coordinated ambush executed by the most powerful woman they knew. Brittany finally managed to find her voice. Her panic was escalating into sheer, unfiltered terror as she looked at Jamal. "Jamal, baby, what is happening?" she pleaded, her voice taking on that shrill, whining tone she used when she wanted to play the victim. "Why are you here with your mother? Clara is lying to you. She is trying to turn you against my family because she is jealous of our vow renewal. Please tell your mother to step aside so we can fix this misunderstanding." Jamal stepped forward, moving past his mother to stand directly in the doorway. He towered over Brittany. The quiet, accommodating surgeon was completely gone. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick stack of folded papers. His voice was devastatingly calm, filled with a profound, final disgust. "There is no misunderstanding, Brittany." Jamal said, his words landing like heavy stones. "I know absolutely everything. I know about the $300,000 you funneled out of my private accounts. I know there was no overseas supply chain crisis. I know you stole my money to buy your parents a new kitchen and to fund a lavish vacation while I was working 80-hour weeks in the hospital." Brittany let out a sharp, panicked squeak. "Jamal, no, that is not true. Clara fabricated those banking records. She is trying to ruin my life. She hacked my accounts. You have to believe me." Jamal shook his head slowly, his eyes devoid of any remaining affection. Clara did not hack anything. My mother's forensic accountants traced every single stolen dollar directly from my trust to your parents' checking account. I saw the receipts, Brittany. I saw the country club payments. I saw the luxury car down payment. You used me as a massive blind bank account to fund this pathetic suburban illusion. You lied to my face every single day. My mother tried to intervene, sensing her daughter's entire marriage collapsing. Jamal, please, Patricia begged, her voice trembling. It was just a temporary bridge loan. We were going to pay you back the second Clara handed over the house. We are family. We have to protect each other. You are not my family, Jamal stated coldly. You actively aided your daughter in embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from me. You tried to steal Clara's home to cover your tracks before my mother audited my trust. You are common thieves hiding behind designer clothes. The brutal honesty of Jamal's words struck Patricia like a physical blow. Her maternal pleading facade evaporated in a single second, replaced by the cornered, vicious desperation of a woman whose entire fraudulent existence was being publicly dismantled. She spun away from Jamal and directed her aggressive, frantic energy straight toward the matriarch of the Dubois family. If this is just an argument about Brittany borrowing some money from her own husband, then you have absolutely no right to be standing inside my daughter's house, Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the grand columns of the porch. She pointed a trembling finger directly at Josephine's face, completely abandoning any pretense of upper-class civility. You are illegally entering a private residence to intimidate my family. Clara told us to come here to collect the keys and the deed. She surrendered this property to us. We are the rightful claimants to this estate. I am going to call the local authorities right now and have you physically removed for trespassing. Josephine did not flinch. She did not raise her hand to swat away Patricia's pointing finger. She simply looked at my mother with the profound clinical disgust one might reserve for a squashed insect on the bottom of a very expensive shoe. Call them, Josephine commanded, her voice dropping to a terrifying, silky smooth register. Please, Patricia, dial the police immediately. I would absolutely love for the local authorities to arrive so I can have you, your financially ruined husband, and your embezzling daughter arrested and escorted off my front lawn in handcuffs. My father stepped forward, his face contorted in a mix of rage and absolute confusion. Your front lawn? Richard sneered, his fists clenching at his sides. Have you completely lost your mind, Josephine? This property belongs to Clara. We have a legally binding agreement in our family chat. She is inside right now, waiting to sign the final transfer paperwork over to me. Josephine let out a short, sharp laugh that cut through the freezing winter air like a blade. Clara is not inside, Richard. Clara is currently sitting in her luxury penthouse in Manhattan, enjoying her absolute financial freedom. She is miles away from your toxic, pathetic grasp, and she did not surrender a single thing to you. Josephine reached slowly into the inner pocket of her immaculate ivory coat. She withdrew a crisp, thick, legally bound document housed in a premium presentation folder. She held it up, holding the heavy paper between two manicured fingers, presenting it exactly like an executioner presenting a warrant. This is the finalized, notarized, and fully recorded commercial deed of transfer. Josephine stated, her words landing with devastating metric precision. I purchased this entire estate directly from Clara. An expedited all-cash transaction executed securely behind closed doors. The funds have completely cleared. The county clerk has officially stamped the records. This historic property, the sprawling lawns you are currently standing on, the wraparound porch you are dirtying with your shoes, it all legally belongs to Onyx Heritage Holdings, the private real estate entity controlled entirely by me. The silence that followed was so absolute, so profoundly total, it felt as though the entire world had been sucked into a vacuum. My father's jaw went completely slack. The aggressive, bullying patriarch who had slammed his fist on the Thanksgiving table and demanded my life savings was instantaneously reduced to a hollow, gasping shell. He stared blindly at the legal document in Josephine's hand. His eyes darted rapidly back and forth, desperately trying to find a loophole in a reality that was rapidly crushing him alive. No, Richard choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic high-pitched wheeze. No, that is entirely impossible. Our lawyer filed a mechanic lien against her title. She was legally paralyzed. She could not sell the house to anyone. She was legally forced to sign it over to us. We had her completely cornered. Josephine tilted her head, observing his complete psychological collapse, with cold, detached satisfaction. Your bottom-feeding extortion lawyer voluntarily dissolved your fraudulent lien the absolute second Clara's premium corporate attorney threatened to have him disbarred, Josephine explained, twisting the knife with flawless legal accuracy. You had absolutely zero leverage. Clara orchestrated this entire handover. She baited you. She invited you here today, not to surrender her home, but to ensure that you would be standing right here, completely isolated and utterly humiliated when I arrived to claim my new property. The realization hit my parents like a freight train. The devastating truth finally penetrated their blinding arrogance. They had not broken my spirit, they had not won. They had been masterfully, ruthlessly outplayed on every single conceivable level. I had liquidated my massive assets, secured my $1.5 million in an untouchable offshore account, and handed the physical keys directly to the one woman who could destroy their entire lives. Patricia dropped her expensive bottle of champagne. It hit the wooden floorboards of the porch and shattered, instantly spraying glass and bubbling liquid across the toes of her designer boots. She let out a strangled, breathless sob, clutching her chest as her knees visibly buckled. She reached out desperately, grabbing my father's wool overcoat to keep herself from collapsing entirely onto the wet wood. Patricia gasped, hyperventilating as the panic attack fully seized her. Richard, the money! If Clara sold the house to Josephine, the money is gone. We have absolutely nothing left to give the bank. They are going to take our house. We are going to be homeless. Everyone at the country club is going to know we are completely bankrupt. Brittany, who had been standing frozen in absolute terror, suddenly let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She spun around, looking wildly at the sprawling lawn where her event planners were still standing awkwardly by their commercial vans, holding their measuring tapes and clipboards. My vow renewal! Brittany screamed, clutching her head with both hands. This is my venue. I already posted the location on my social media. All of my followers are expecting a massive society event. You cannot do this to me. Jamal, you have to stop your mother. Tell her she cannot take my venue away. I need this party to save my brand. The sheer breathtaking delusion required for Brittany to scream about her social media brand and her luxury party while actively standing in front of the husband she had just robbed blind was astounding. She was a woman completely divorced from reality, desperately clinging to a burning, sinking ship. Jamal looked at his wife, his expression hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. Jamal looked at his wife, his expression hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. He did not yell. He did not display any of the frantic theatrics that consumed my broken family. Instead, he reached into his heavy wool coat and withdrew a securely bound legal folder. He held it for a brief second, feeling the physical weight of his ruined marriage, before he simply opened his hand and let the folder drop. It hit the wooden floorboards of the porch with a sharp, definitive smack, landing directly at Brittany's designer boots. "What is that?" Brittany whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. She stared down at the heavy manila envelope as if it were an active explosive device. "Those are your divorce papers," Jamal stated, his voice completely devoid of any remaining affection. "My attorneys filed them with the court early this morning. Inside that folder, you will also find the complete unredacted forensic audit of my private trust accounts. It details every single unauthorized transfer you executed over the past 12 months. Every fake invoice you generated, every fraudulent signature you forged, and every single dime you funneled directly into your parents' bank accounts. It is all meticulously documented, perfectly categorized, and legally binding. You are absolutely finished, Brittany." Brittany fell to her knees on the cold porch, completely ignoring the shards of broken glass from my mother's shattered champagne bottle. She frantically tore open the folder, her eyes darting across the highlighted bank statements and the aggressively drafted divorce petition. Jamal. Please, she sobbed desperately, trying to grab his hand. You cannot do this. We took vows. I only took the money because my parents were going to lose everything. They told me they would pay it all back. They swore to me it was just a temporary fix. You have to forgive me. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. Jamal snatched his hand back, stepping away from her as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. There is absolutely no fixing embezzlement, Brittany. You did not just make a simple marital mistake. You orchestrated a calculated, sophisticated financial crime. You watched me work myself to the absolute bone, picking up agonizing double shifts at the hospital to replace money you knew you had already stolen. You smiled in my face every single morning, while actively draining my family's legacy behind my back. You are a pathological liar. My father, desperately trying to salvage whatever microscopic shred of dignity he had left, stepped forward and held his hands up in a placating gesture. Jamal-san, listen to me. This is all just a massive, terrible misunderstanding. We were facing a sudden liquidity crisis. We fully intended to reimburse your accounts the absolute second Clara finalized her property transfer. We just needed a brief bridge loan to cover our suburban mortgage. We never meant to permanently deprive you of your assets. We are family. We can settle this privately without involving the courts or destroying a beautiful marriage. Do not ever call me your son again. Jamal fired back, his voice booming with sudden, terrifying authority. You are not a businessman experiencing a liquidity crisis, Richard. You are a complete fraud. You lost your corporate job 3 years ago, and you spent every day since then pretending to be a wealthy executive. You used my stolen money to pay your country club dues. You used it to buy a luxury vehicle. You actively conspired with your daughter to bleed me dry just so you could keep playing golf with people who secretly despise you. My mother, Patricia, let out a pathetic, high-pitched wail. She collapsed against the railing of the porch, her immaculate suburban facade completely and utterly obliterated. The realization that her entire social standing was about to violently evaporate was breaking her mind in real time. Josephine, please, Patricia begged, looking at the Dubois matriarch with wide, terrified eyes. You are a mother. You understand the desperate lengths we go to for our children. We were just trying to protect Brittany's future. If you expose this, we will lose our home. We will be completely ruined. The entire community will know we are bankrupt. Have some mercy. Josephine Dubois looked down at my weeping mother with absolute, freezing contempt. Mercy is a privilege reserved for people who possess a conscience, Patricia, she said smoothly. You possess nothing but blinding greed. You sat at a Thanksgiving table and attempted to extort your own independent daughter to cover up the fact that you were actively stealing from my son. You weaponized family loyalty to mask your profound financial incompetence. You do not care about Brittany's future. You only care about your imported marble countertops and your pathetic social status. Josephine stepped forward, signaling her private security detail to advance slightly. I highly advise you to pick up your scattered boxes and remove yourselves from my property immediately. My legal team has already forwarded the complete forensic audit of Brittany's embezzlement to the district attorney's office. They are currently reviewing the files for felony wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy. You are not just facing a messy public divorce and a brutal suburban foreclosure. You are actively facing a massive, devastating criminal investigation. The color drained completely from my father's face. The aggressive, bullying patriarch was officially dead, replaced by a terrified, broken old man who suddenly realized he was likely going to spend his retirement in a federal prison cell. Criminal charges, he gasped, clutching his chest. We will pay the money back. We will find a way to liquidate our remaining assets. We will give you everything we have left. You have absolutely nothing left to give, Josephine replied coldly. Your assets are mortgaged, your credit is destroyed, and your reputation is annihilated. Jamal, we are leaving. Jamal turned his back on his weeping wife, leaving the three of them standing there completely and utterly shattered. Jamal turned his back on his weeping wife, leaving the three of them standing there completely and utterly shattered. He walked down the stone pathway, his posture perfectly straight, and climbed into the back of the waiting town car. Josephine Dubois cast one final sweeping look of absolute disdain over the pathetic scene on her front porch. She gave a curt nod to her security detail. The massive men stepped back, escorted Josephine to her vehicle, and the entire Dubois motorcade smoothly pulled out of the driveway, crunching over the gravel until they disappeared down the winding country road. Richard, Patricia, and Brittany were left completely alone in the freezing winter air. They had no money, no leverage, and no venue. They were standing on the porch of a house they did not own, staring at a pile of flattened moving boxes and a shattered bottle of cheap champagne, finally forced to face the catastrophic reality of their own blinding greed. The silence over the property was absolute, broken only by the freezing winter wind. They had spent decades building an illusion of superiority, and in less than 10 minutes that entire illusion had been shattered into pieces too small to ever rebuild. 1 year has passed since that cold November morning. I am currently standing in the expansive living room of my Manhattan penthouse, holding a cup of freshly brewed black coffee, watching the morning sun reflect brilliantly off the glass skyscrapers of the city. The past 12 months have been the most peaceful and productive period of my entire life. Without the constant suffocating financial drain and emotional manipulation of my toxic family, my career absolutely skyrocketed. I reinvested the $1.5 million I secured from the property sale directly into expanding my independent wealth management firm. I hired 2 junior partners, acquired a massive portfolio of high-net-worth clients, and established myself as one of the most ruthless and effective financial advisors in the city. I do not miss the Hudson Valley estate. A house is simply a structure made of wood and stone. True peace comes from the absolute security of knowing no one can ever leverage your hard work against you. The universe has a remarkable way of balancing the scales, especially when the justice system gets involved. The forensic audit Josephine Dubois handed over to the district attorney triggered a massive, unavoidable chain reaction. Richard and Patricia were completely destroyed. When the local suburban bank realized they were implicated in a massive wire fraud investigation regarding stolen trust funds, they immediately accelerated the foreclosure process. My parents lost their pristine colonial home within 3 months. They were violently evicted, forced to pack their designer clothes into garbage bags, while the neighbors they had spent a decade trying to impress watched from their driveways in stunned silence. The country club formally revoked their membership, sending a public notice of their financial delinquency to the entire affluent community. They were entirely shunned. Nobody wanted to be associated with accused fraudsters. Today, Richard and Patricia are living in a cramped, incredibly cheap one-bedroom apartment in a rundown industrial neighborhood far outside the city limits. They declared total bankruptcy. My father works as a part-time cashier at a local hardware store, while my mother cleans houses for the very same wealthy women she used to look down on. Brittany suffered the steepest fall of all. The criminal investigation into her embezzlement resulted in a severe plea deal. To avoid serving hard time in a federal prison, she was forced to plead guilty to grand larceny and agree to a massive, crippling restitution plan to repay every single stolen dollar back to the Dubois family trust. The divorce proceedings were absolutely brutal. Because Jamal had undeniable proof of her financial crimes and her pathological lying, the judge granted him full legal and physical custody of their child. Brittany is only allowed strictly supervised visitation every other weekend. She lost her luxury SUV, her designer wardrobe, and her completely fake social media empire. Her followers abandoned her the second the scandal went public. Currently, my former golden child sister is working 40 hours a week as a minimum wage barista at a strip mall coffee shop. Every single paycheck she earns is immediately garnished by the court to pay back her furious ex-husband. I have not spoken a single word to any of them since I sent that deceptive text message baiting them to the estate. I changed my phone number, tightened my corporate security, and permanently closed that dark chapter of my life. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is recognizing when the people who share your blood are actually a toxic infection threatening your survival. You do not owe your sanity or your hard-earned assets to people who view you as nothing more than a disposable bank account. My family demanded my total submission. Instead, I gave them the exact financial execution they deserved. I built an impenetrable permanent fortress of independence. Every morning I wake up feeling incredibly grateful for the harsh lessons they taught me because those lessons forged me into a woman who can never be broken. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and completely cut off toxic family members who tried to manipulate or steal from you? How did you manage to establish your boundaries and protect your own peace? Your unique experiences are incredibly valuable, and sharing them might just help someone else find their own strength. I would love to hear your personal stories of resilience and triumph in the comments section below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more content about building independence and refusing to be a victim. Always remember that your success, your unyielding self-respect, and your absolute happiness are the sweetest and most devastating forms of revenge. Thank you so very much for watching. The story of Clara and her family serves as a powerful masterclass in navigating toxic relationships. The most profound lesson woven throughout this saga is that true power does not come from winning an emotional screaming match, but from establishing uncompromising financial and emotional boundaries. Clara's parents and sister were entirely consumed by the illusion of suburban status. They built their lives on a fragile foundation of debt and deceit, weaponizing family loyalty to fund their greed. They expected Clara to crumble under the weight of traditional family obligations. Society often conditions us to believe that blood ties demand endless sacrifice, even at the cost of our own personal stability. However, Clara shattered this toxic expectation. She demonstrated that the most effective way to neutralize manipulative people is through silent strategic action rather than engaging in their dramatic chaos. By maintaining her composure and relying on her hard-earned financial independence, she transformed herself from a potential victim into an untouchable force. She did not beg for their love or try to make them understand her perspective. Instead, she removed their access to her life entirely. This narrative teaches us that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary act of self-preservation. When dealing with individuals who view you merely as a resource, your greatest revenge is your own success and absolute detachment. We must learn to recognize when a relationship, even a familial one, has become a dangerous liability rather than a safe sanctuary. If you are ready to stop letting toxic people drain your energy and start building your own fortress of independence, hit the subscribe button and share your boundary-setting journey in the comments below.